Well, hey, friends, welcome back to the podcast. I am so excited about my guest today. You are going to love her. Okay, so my guest today is Chalene Johnson. If you don't know her and don't know who she is in the online space, I will be very, very surprised. You might recognize her name from one of the many late night fitness infomercials she used to do years ago. She was a health and fitness expert for years and years and years, but she's also like an OG, an original gangster in the world of like business marketing. She's an 8-figure a year earner. Okay. So do the math, count the zeros there. She's a New York Times bestseller. She's the host of 2 hit podcasts, both The Chalene Show and Build Your Tribe, with over 90 million downloads, you guys. 90 million. I mean, I'm thinking, oh, our 7 million downloads is phenomenal until you hear 90 million. Chalene and her husband, Brett, are empty nesters, and they literally are living the dream right now, living my dream. They are traveling the world and managing their businesses remotely, which for me is just like the epitome of time freedom and financial freedom. So she's been featured everywhere. So I'm going to be shocked if you don't know who she is. She's been on NBC, ABC, Fox, Good Morning America, Inside Edition, the New York Post, Daily Mail, Forbes, the Kelly Ripa Show, Success Magazine, on and on and on. The Huffington Post even listed her as one of the top 50 female entrepreneurs to watch. So I've known Chalene in the online space for a long, long time. I took her Turbo Kick classes years ago. I used to watch her infomercials in the middle of the night when I was up nursing babies. I did have her on the podcast a little over 4 years ago, back in 2020, if you want to check out episode number 151. And I was so honored that Chalene endorsed my book, Fear is Not the Boss of You. You're going to love this conversation. We're talking about a variety of topics. Let's dive in. Without further ado, here's Chalene. Chalene, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
I am so excited to have you here. It's been, I think, 4 years ago is when I had you on here last. And so
Really?
I know,
Gosh.
and we have not aged a bit, either of us. We look phenomenal. Nothing has changed. So listen, I was
Say it
thinking
louder.
about all the different things I wanted to talk to you about in this podcast. And I thought, gosh, do you know how much Chalene and I have in common? That's what I thought. And I thought, okay, I hate it when people say that to me, and I'm going to totally do it to her. Because here's what I was thinking. I was thinking, okay, we have so much in common and we disagree on one major thing. All right. So we're both over 50. We both have like kids that are a little bit older. I know yours are married, mine are not, but we can arrange marriages with people. We both have husbands who are just a little bit like direct shooters. Like, do you get nervous at all ever when Brett talks? Because I hold my breath with my husband all of the time. Yeah. Okay. So I'm thinking about that. I call my husband, like, he's like Rip on Yellowstone, but he's like the Christian version of Rip. So both of our husbands cook. We both have houses in Florida. We both like hair and makeup. We're both addicted to castor oil. And I thought the one big thing that we disagree on are golden goose shoes.
No, can't do it.
I am literally going to bring out my arsenal of golden goose shoes. And because I heard you say that, you and Brett both, you're like, you hate golden goose. And I'm like, I love them.
It's right up there with the Stanley Cup for me.
I am so offended. And here's my Stanley Cup right next to it.
See? How did I know? See?
I know, right?
It's like a kit.
You could call that a mile away. So anyway, well, thank you for being here. Because I always learn so much from you. I learned so much from your content. You're one of the few people who always comes up in my feed. Always on my stories.
Isn't that weird? How like, isn't it strange? Like the things that do come up in your feed, like nobody in my family comes up in my feed. I have them favorited. I watch every time I can. Like they just don't come up. They're like, sure, we don't, Mom. I'm like, no, really?
No, it's unfortunate because there's people that really do have great content that I would love to see. And yet, like, Instagram has basically hidden it from us to some degree. And so it's a little bit disappointing. But I wanted to start out talking about Patreon. And I know that you have a lot of people asking you some questions about this right now. But I signed up for your Patreon recently. Because I knew that you were doing like this whole take on the rise and fall of Rachel and Dave Hollis, who I knew, by the way, and I'll tell you some more of that. And so I've never signed up for Patreon. Like I hear people talking about Patreon, and basically it's like listening to you on a podcast, but having to pay for it.
Yep.
And is that how you describe it to people?
Yeah, it's a paid podcast, right? And there are paid podcasts that are on the podcast app.
Right.
And that's a relatively new thing. At the time that I started my Patreon, it was something Apple wasn't offering to just like the average creator. You couldn't have a subscription base. And so I had a couple of friends who were like, it is the greatest joy of my life. You will love it. If you've already got a following and you've want some freedom and flexibility, I think you'll really like it. So I was like, all right, I'll try it.
Okay. So tell me, like, how long ago did you start the Patreon? Was
Uh,
it
I think it's been 2 years.
okay? And was the main reason, because it's interesting, I pulled my Instagram stories, and out of my 100,000 plus people, I got 4 voters, not really more than that, but I did pull my audience and I said, how many of you like subscribe to someone's Patreon? And only like 13% of my audience did. The majority of them were like, we don't even know what it is. So
Yeah,
would
yeah,
you tell people like why you started your Patreon account, kind of what you use it for, etc.?
sure. So the reason why I use a Patreon account, and I'll speak specifically to people who are podcasters, because there are a lot of people who use it for a variety of reasons. It's kind of like a place to have your most loyal customers support you. So originally, I think it was started by people who were artists. I believe the founder is a musician, and he wanted to create a way for people who were supporters of the band to kind of, it's almost like crowdfund. And in exchange, they would do things for them, like they would give them discounts to events, or they would record songs for them. Eventually, it turned into something that podcasters could do because it was very difficult to get sponsors for your show, etc. So I'll speak to the why I use it as a podcaster, and more specifically to someone who might want to do it from a podcasting standpoint. For me, I wanted a place where it's like anyone who, if I've got a free podcast that's coming out 3 times a week, and then I've got a business podcast that's coming out 2 times a week that's free, why would anyone want more content of me, right? And so what I discovered is that there were people who were like, I just like hearing your voice. I just like you keeping me company. I just want to hear you, shoot the breeze and just talk about whatever's going on in your life. And I'm also kind of more curious about some of the personal stuff. I don't really need a personal development or business takeaway. I just want time with you. And I was like, that sounds fun. That sounds easy.
Yeah.
So I started it for that reason, for my deepest, most loyal supporter, I guess.
I love that.
And I did it because I knew I like to tell stories. And some of the stories I have to tell are not appropriate for the regular show, might get me canceled, not canceled, might upset one of my sponsors, right?
Yeah.
And so I just wanted that freedom and that flexibility, and just wanted to like go deeper with a certain segment of my audience that's been with me for a really long time.
It's almost like you can be more unplugged.
Absolutely.
And so do you, is it super polished every time? Or I feel like I've heard you literally say you're recording sometimes in the car.
Always. So Patreon initially for me was no staff, no team, no nothing, because it's literally, and I say to people, there's no takeaway. There's no value in this, except I'm going to keep you company and I'm going to entertain you, right?
Yeah.
And so I record it on my phone using the voice memo. Then I upload that file directly from my phone to the Patreon app on my phone. I write a quick description and it's done. And I've got 2 tiers, a $5 tier and a $25 tier.
Okay.
And, like a $25 tier, that is crazy. That's for that person. Here's the deal with the $25 tier. I created that tier because not likely someone's going to get on a $25 tier because they want to listen to you because they hate you. You know what I mean? Like some people watch your social media because they don't like you. And some people listen to your $5 tier because they want to, get, write something about you mean on the internet. But like no one's going to do that for $25. If they are, more power to them. Like, if they want to pay me to hate me, go for it. But
do you get to set those prices, or does Patreon set them?
You set the prices. Most creators have 3 tiers.
Okay.
I just was like, I'm just going to do 2 tiers. I couldn't even think of like a 3rd tier at the time.
Right.
We might switch to a 3rd tier. And, but anyways, it was very, very low production, So the pros of it are super easy to create. For me anyways, it was fun. It is an outlet. It's like therapy. It's just silliness. It's easy. And it's a very simple revenue source.
I love that. Do you feel more comfortable though, for real, having Brett there versus on your main podcast? Because I know like Jason, my husband, Jason, he's on my podcast every once in a while. He's not on social media at all, which is weird because that's where, his wife's there every single day. But I love that. I'm actually quite jealous of that in a way. But there's times that I'm like, he'll come on social media with me and I'll be like, hold my breath. Cause I'm like, I know he's going to say something, exceptionally flirtatious, or he's going into a gray area where I'm going to get DMs, and
Right.
which is totally fine. But I can see how using something like Patreon, you just kind of feel like you could, you know what, you're paying to be here. There's not a lot of rules inside of this playground, and we kind of are going to do what we want to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that.
And the highest tier is where
That's
people
even
actually go because they want to hear from
yeah,
my husband.
unleashed. I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you ever think people like your husband more than they like you?
They
Because I
do.
yeah,
On
mine too.
Patreon, 1000% they do. And I don't care. I love that. You know
I
what I
know.
mean?
I think the same thing. I think they love
Yeah.
him more than they love me. So I joined your Patreon just because I wanted to get your take on Rachel and Dave Hollis. And initially I think you were thinking it was just going to be like a couple segments, and it turned into be like a 12-part series. How many
Yeah.
segments were you originally thinking it was going to be? Or did you have any idea?
I thought maybe I could do in one, but then
Yeah.
once I started like writing out my notes, I'm like, oh no, there's no way I can do this in one. But
Yeah.
I could definitely do this in two, I thought
Right.
before I hit record.
Right. And so here's what I'll say to those of you that are listening to this podcast is, yes, it's about Rachel and Dave Hollis. However, it's really much more about mega influencer culture and how we treat influencers. And on the flip side, like the parts of that life that you could relate to, because do you have over like 3 million followers? Is that right? Is
Oh,
it?
combined, I'm sure it's over that.
Okay, I was thinking it was at least that. And so I have a fraction of that. I'm not quite to even a million. And so I can try to imagine the stress of that, the vulnerability of that many followers. I mean, I can think of like times when I've been out in public and somebody will like last night, my husband and I are walking through the neighborhood, we're walking the dog, some girls drive by in a golf cart and yell, "I follow you on Facebook," and that was real cute stuff. I've also been in the Cayman Islands on a beach in a swimsuit, and somebody walks by, and they know me. And my audience is a fraction of yours, was a fraction of the Hollises. So I can only imagine, just the pressure of that sort of visibility and what that does to families and what that does to kids. And so I was super intrigued because I knew them. And here's how
Have
I
you made
know
it to
them.
the end of the episode of the series?
Oh yes, I did.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
And I just want to tell you, I think that you did the most phenomenal job. It was handled
Oh.
was you just stood. I mean, I know everybody's telling you that, but there was so
No,
much
not everybody, but
integrity.
thank you.
Really, no, you used so much integrity, and you talked about things and brought up things, because the truth is there were so many rumors. And sometimes when you hear the same thing again and again and again 100 times, you're like, well, clearly that's the truth.
Right.
It made me look at both of them in such a different way. And it was also just heartbreaking since I had met them. And so I
Mm.
knew them before they really like blew up. And so
Hmm.
it was probably, I think it was maybe 6 or 7 years ago, Rachel was going to be coming to Kansas City, where we live full time with Dave. They were having some sort of a Disney. It's back when he was with Disney. They were having some sort of a meeting here for Disney. I messaged her people and said, "Hey, would you want to do a meet and greet? Because I've got people, she's got people. That could be a lot of fun." And they were like, "Absolutely." So we had a meet and greet. I got to meet her and Dave that way. I had her come into my monthly coaching group and talk about Instagram. That's when her Instagram was just starting. I think it was before her viral,
Oh,
the stretch mark post that she did.
yeah.
And so she was on my podcast, and then she was having her first Rise conference. And so her people invited me out as a VIP. That was at their home. We didn't know the week we were there that they were putting the house up for sale and moving to Dripping Springs. And I just
Uh-huh.
remember walking around their house thinking, this is so bizarre that they have such a huge platform. And there's probably 50 of us VIPs, and we're all just wandering throughout their home. And I'm like, what an invasion of their privacy. But then it was because they were
Mm.
getting ready to move.
Oh,
It was really shortly after that conference, I actually stopped following them both. And I was starting to write my book, Fear's Not the Boss of You, which you were kind enough to endorse. She had come out with Girl Wash Your Face, which was everywhere. And I just felt myself like I had started reading it, and then it really wasn't for me. So I stopped. But I found myself when I was writing my own book thinking, okay, her people loved her book though. So like, what about her book did they like? What about her voice? And so I felt myself being like almost influenced. So
mm-hmm.
I stopped.
Mm-hmm.
I stopped. And
Mm-hmm.
then when he had his second book come out, I think it was in 2021, The Built Through Courage, his team asked if he could be on the podcast and I could promote it. And we ended up, my team read sections of it, and we decided it wasn't a good fit for us. So I felt like I knew them to a degree. And so I really wanted to listen and get your take. And man, it was heartbreaking. It was just absolutely gut wrenching, some of that. And so it was very compassionate. It wasn't gossipy in the least, but I feel like to some degree that changed you. as a content creator, as what people would consider a mega influencer as well. Like I heard you cry, on the Patreon when you were talking about. So tell me like what that did to you just kind of on the insides to go through the whole story.
Well, I kind of am a crybaby. If something is very touching, I'll cry. But I also talked about in that podcast how one of the things I hate are people who do crying videos like on social. Like I don't understand that.
Manipulation.
Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah.
But I have myself like midway through a podcast caught myself getting emotional, and that happens. How did it change me? I started it with the same kind of belief that I ended it with, which is I felt like what happened to them was really unfair and it was a crowd think. I think, frankly, the groundswell of the popularity of her book was crowd think. Like I just knew so many people that everyone was just like, it was like the book to recommend, even though no one was like really reading it, or they would read it and they go, yeah, I don't know. I talked to so many people that like I've talked to more people who said I bought the book and I don't know, it didn't do much for me than I've talked to who said the book changed my life, right? So I think that took over that crowd think, that group think. And I think once people, especially women, when she started to fall, it was a dog pile. And I hated seeing that, even though I wasn't necessarily a fan of either one of them, even though I didn't think there was much authenticity at the end of the day. I really felt for them and I felt for their children. And I just was like, how do you recover from that? Like, I know what it feels like to get 1,000 really nice comments and 2 of them be cruel, and how it can be just like, oh, you just like, I'm like composing a text and it makes me distracted and I'm a very secure person. So I just could not even imagine what that felt like. And I also felt like a lot of the people who were creating content about them and other successful people, it was taking a toll on them too. Like and then it becomes this like toxic cycle, right? Where it's like, oh, I made this takedown judgment video about fill in the blank person, and it got me a lot of new subscribers. And so now I'm a slave to the algorithm and I'm going to create more of this content. And now you're like in this weird negative space. And even though we all from time to time, participate in gossip or whatever, like once that becomes your industry, the way you're making money, has a toxic effect. And so all of it to me needed a full explanation. Like I wanted to explain things from their side. And I also wanted to understand the things that I thought were true, that were just based on rumor.
Yeah. One of the things that I loved is you did continue to kind of bring things back to the children and what the children see on social media and the responsibility that we have as people to, for what we're putting out into the world, because it affects more than, just the people that we're maybe directing it towards. And so the whole thing, I just thought you just did an incredible job with. And then I know last night I sat in on a Zoom call where people were asking you, Chalene, who are you going to talk about next? Because you really could do like a 2020 thing if you wanted to. And so it's funny because this week, I'm not sure if you've heard about the death of Micah Miller. Have you heard of? She was married to a pastor. She's 30, pastor's wife in South Carolina, age 30. They found her dead. Is last week, I think. They are ruling it a suicide, but her husband got up and preached the next day, preached the entire sermon, and got to the end and said, hey, I don't want anybody to leave. But I've got an announcement. Make sure you're please sending in your tithe checks and still continuing to come to church. But oh, by the way, my wife died yesterday. Turns out he'd been having an affair. Like so it's a whole thing if you look for justice for Micah Miller. So I almost sent you something this week. I'm like, I don't think Chalene wants to go down the 2020 route. However, you are mesmerizing at, kind of
so nice.
Going things. But I did wonder, did Rachel Hollis ever reach out to you?
No. And I don't know her, but I suspect I get the sense that she's really had to really create insanely strong boundaries.
Be very guarded.
I mean, because like, hello, I've got like a little Patreon that, isn't on her radar. And she's been fodder for every, international publication has done a story about their rise and fall. Yeah. And I do believe mine is really different.
Mhm.
And I'm proud of that. I didn't know if it would appeal to people in that way.
I'm
I
sure it did.
assumed if I didn't dig up some dirt, if I didn't share
Mhm.
some salacious content and offer some opinion, that it wouldn't be very interesting to people. So that's kind of why I did other things to keep people's attention, like the music and the
Yeah.
storytelling.
Yeah.
And I left a lot of things out that it would have been really easy
Mhm.
to continue to dogpile on the people who are still here,
Right.
you know? And
Yeah.
so that's why I wanted it to be about divorce and the dynamic that happens when a woman starts making more than a man. And I wanted it to be about addiction. And I wanted it to be about um, codependency and
Mhm.
the golden handcuffs that social media can be for
It
people,
does.
and how
Yes.
traumatic it can be if you're
Yeah.
not prepared, if you're
Right.
not steadied, if you don't know your value before you step into that space. I wanted it to be,
And it
all
was
of those
all of those.
things.
It was all those things, Shalene. Because like I said, it was about Dave and Rachel, but it was really about all of those things. And I just appreciated that so much. Do you ever like secretly dream of signing off of social media? Or do you, I get the feeling like you love it. It's an interesting place. Like I was trying to tell the women, I had a call yesterday with a bunch of people who are in a boot camp with me, and they're in a VIP session, and I actually started to cry. And I am not a crier. Like I don't cry in appropriate spots. I cry when I'm coaching women sometimes for some reason, but
Mm.
I told them it's because um like after having my business online for as long as I have, and I started my Facebook business page, 10 minutes after Mark said we could have business Facebook pages. So I can't see at this point how to get off of the content hamster wheel. And sometimes that feels so heavy and so overwhelming to me. And I think it's the older I get. Also, there's this weird part of me. It's like, I don't want to have to do reels. I don't want to have to do, and then I look at my husband who's like not on social media at all. And I
Yeah.
think he's so free. He's so free for us just to go on vacation and not feel like he has to record it. And then there's this part of me, it's like, okay, but Jen, if you actually weren't on social media, you would miss it. But I think the part that is the catch right now and the rub for me is that I feel like I have to. And there's a little
Mm.
bit of me, the older I get, at 50, almost 53, that I'm like, I just really don't feel like doing what I don't want to do
Yeah.
anymore. And part of
Yeah.
that is the social media game. So I'm just curious, do you still love it?
I do. But I have had those times for
Mhm.
sure. And it's usually when I'm not inspired to create content. And I've felt it the most in the past when I was consuming too much social. I don't consume, I mean, like I really consume very, very,
Yeah.
very
Wisdom.
little social media. I have a couple YouTube channels I like to watch for entertainment purposes,
Mhm.
but here's my saving grace. What changed that for me was I stopped consuming short form content.
Okay.
So reels,
Mhm. Yeah.
stories, I don't, because they don't make me feel good. Even if it's
Yeah,
like people that I have curated to follow,
I would agree.
it's not that that person doesn't make me feel good. It's the
Mhm.
I've just changed subject. I've changed subject. I've changed, like every time I swipe, there's like a new subject and my brain just feels very
Yes.
cluttered.
Yeah.
So I really like content, social media content that calms me.
That's
And,
so good.
there's that parasocial relationship that I looked at so deeply while I was doing this series.
Mhm.
It really kind of like understand like why people felt as though Dave and Rachel betrayed them. I'm like, what? When they needed to get a divorce, people felt betrayed. And I'm like, that I need to understand this deeper. And so I really looked into the parasocial relationship to understand it. And it
Yeah.
taught me a lot about social media and why I believe there's a very distinct difference between the way short form content makes us feel and long form content makes us feel. And studies have shown that the parasocial relationship can have a very positive effect
Okay.
because it does feel like you're spending time with a friend
Mhm.
who doesn't have expectations of you. They're
Yeah.
not like, "Hey, did you hear what I just said?"
Right.
And they're always there, and you it's like watching a television show. It's like you really are like this that morning news anchor, like they give me a certain feel or a vibe or familiarity, and it does release endorphins in your brain that are
Yes.
very similar to what we experience when we're with a friend who has a positive impact on us. And
Interesting.
so there is that same kind of like positive impact
Yeah.
when it's a social media content that makes you relax.
Okay.
And that's why I think keep you company, that's what I call it, keep you company content can have that effect on people. It can make them
It's
feel
really
like more
good.
relaxed, more
Mhm.
comforted, like they're with a
Yeah.
friend, and you're keeping them company, and there's nothing negative about your relationship.
Right. Let's talk
So,
about what you just said about how the short form, like the stories and things, they were making your brain kind of bounce all over the place. So, I think my favorite content from you probably of all your content has to do with anything that is related to your ADHD, which
oh,
you very vocal about talking about. So like when you and Brett do videos and you're losing your keys and you're running late and you've got time blindness, or I remember this one video where you talked about how when you guys watch movies, like he always has to explain everything to you, like you're just not following. And I'm like, oh my gosh, she's living in my brain. Like
yeah,
this is my life. Now, I have never had been tested for ADHD. I don't feel like I need to be let's just talk about ADHD. Can we? Because
sure.
I feel like there's so many of us walking around that perhaps have ADHD to a degree, but I'm also like raising a child with ADHD. So I think there's a huge difference between
Has your
leaning
child
towards
been
some
tested?
tendencies. Do what?
Has your child been tested?
Oh yeah, she's medicated. Yeah.
Okay.
So she's on the same medication that you have discussed, and that I mean it's a totally different child. Her ability to be able to what we call stay on the rails versus just being off the rail. It's an incredible thing, but this is all like kind of brand new to us in the last couple of years, and so. But then watching like some of the things that she does, seeing content that like you're making about ADHD. My friend Christy Wright, do you know Christy?
I know that name.
Yeah, she used to be the female face for the Dave Ramsey.
Okay.
Yes, and so she's out on her own now. She's phenomenal. Recently diagnosed with ADHD, and so her and I were talking one time. She said that like I don't remember what the statistic was that if you're an entrepreneur, something like you have 500% more likeliness of being having ADHD as an entrepreneur than not. And so there's sometimes people say things, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I have that, I do that. And then there's other times I'm like, okay, I think I just have some tendencies, just being a
Ah,
female, just
well,
being
that's why I think it would be
postmenopausal.
really beneficial. I think personally, it's really beneficial to get tested and do the type of testing where they actually scan your brain
I
so you can
know.
see what areas of your brain you have blood flow because the types of ADHD, it's just as varied as the types of autism, right? I mean, not types, but
Right.
degrees, right?
Mhm.
And there's a spectrum. There's a spectrum of ADHD. There are types of
Yeah.
ADHD. And so personally, and I know that's controversial for some people, but
Nope. I love
for
it.
those who look at the brain, it's real, then you don't wonder like, huh? And
Right.
also knowing the type of ADHD for me anyways, knowing the type of ADHD that I have makes it a lot easier to manage and so much more it helps my husband to understand.
Right. Right. Because Jason, same. He's wired to and I'm wired completely different. How old were you when you got tested?
45.
Okay. When do you think that it is time for someone to get tested?
My dad
Like,
got tested when he was 71.
really?
Yeah.
And does he have ADHD? Or are you
Yeah. Oh
comfortable
yeah, yeah,
sharing
yeah.
that?
I knew he
Because
did.
it's very
I just wanted
much
to know if he had the
right.
same kind as me.
Yeah. And does he?
Yeah.
Okay, fascinating. And
Yeah.
so, and does he medicate as well, or is he like able to
No.
function really fine?
No, but I
Isn't
wish
that
you would.
fascinating?
I
Yeah,
mean, I wish you would try it. Like,
yeah.
and so also not every type of ADHD
Hmm.
is well supported by, the typical stimulants, right? But there are other types of off-label use of other drugs that can help people depending on the
Yes,
type of ADHD that they have. And so I just think it's helpful to just understand it. Like for some
yeah,
people if they're taking like an Adderall, for example,
yes.
and they have like Ring of Fire or anxiety, a type of ADHD that
Mhm.
is has more anxiety. If they take a medication, they're going to be more obsessive. They have a crash.
Right.
It makes them jittery. They often lose their appetite. For
Mhm.
me, it slows my brain down.
Yes. Yeah.
So
It's
yeah,
really interesting because when our one kiddo has because there are days that we forget, we're running around or we're on vacation or something. And so on occasion, but it is so obvious to the rest of the people in the house. Did she forget her? And I'm like, oh gosh, yes. And so,
yeah.
yeah. Do you though, like at this point, like I feel like like I'm fascinated by the way you think because I can follow you. Like, well, I
Ah,
want to, you're talking about this and then you jump to this and then you jump to this.
you're with me.
I can also tell that when you like really like you dial it in and sometimes you get like super, I don't want to say obsessive about particular things, but I was telling my husband last night, I can remember when you went through a phase where you roller skated all the time on your social
Yep.
media. You remember that?
Yep. Oh
And
yeah.
so it's interesting because when I look at our daughter with ADHD, she decided like over Christmas she was going to learn how to jump rope. And so for weeks, Chalene, that's all, I mean, jump rope every single, and she is a phenomenal jump roper, but it's like she goes all in on a topic and then that's all she can see for a little bit. And like, I feel like I've seen just a smidgen of that in you. Is that
Oh
fair
yeah.
to say? And so I almost wondered if that like happened when you were creating the Patreon series about the Hollises too. It was like you were so dialed in that you
Yeah.
like you got further and further in. And so do you find yourself doing that, with just different topics throughout life? Just
All the time. And,
yeah.
it can be a good thing, but it's also
Yeah.
sometimes a bad thing. And sometimes I get to this place where I have to be aware, like, I just feel like I have to keep doing this, but I don't. And so I have to have these
Mhm.
conversations with myself like, you can stop. You really can stop.
Yeah.
You really don't need to know the architectural structure of that, why this ship is not sinking, why this big cruise ship. You really don't need to know
Yeah.
that. Like, you don't need
Yeah.
to spend the next 17 days understanding how ships don't sink. Like,
Right.
but I've had to kind of manage that all my life. And I think I
Yeah.
probably always will. And
Right.
then there are times where it's like, okay, I want to scratch this itch and I'm going to give myself permission to. And
Yeah.
the reason why so many entrepreneurs have ADHD is because we don't do well working for other people.
Right.
And so I know, I hope this doesn't sound offensive, but I'm the boss, I'm the CEO.
Mhm.
I, I won't hire somebody in certain key roles if they have ADHD because like
Interesting. Yeah.
I know that's,
Well, yeah, because the two of you combined, that would be not a good, yeah, combination.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel like to some degree though, also that ADHD is kind of almost like a superpower at this point for you?
It can be, right?
Is that
Like,
a bad
so
way?
I will not tire of learning something and,
Yeah.
and I'll just go and go and go.
Yeah.
Um, like I said today on my podcast, when someone says, "Oh, you know what? I just researched this." I'm like, "No, you Googled it." Let me tell you
Yeah.
the difference between
Research.
researching something and Googling a
Uh,
few subjects and reading a few blogs. Like, there's a different kind of deep dive. So yeah, it has definitely served me. It
yeah.
has, um, there are things I've been able to do because of it that I know others could not have,
Yeah.
and uncovered things. And because I don't know what it is, but like there's this side of me that's believes very much in the truth and
Mhm.
justice. And so if I get a little bee in my bonnet that someone's been
Yeah.
wronged or there's some kind of like
Something
kink in the
smells off.
system,
Yeah.
oh, look out. I
Yeah.
will dig and dig and dig until I
Yeah.
figure it out and understand who needs to be advocated for.
Yeah.
So
I love that.
yeah,
I
I
love
just have
that.
to I have to manage it so that it does because it's, I have to figure out, wait, how do I make this work in
Mhm.
business? So
Yeah.
how can I channel this towards something that helps us grow a business?
I love that you're doing content about that. For those of us that are in business and otherwise, just you're kind of normalizing some of, not that it's normal, but or needs to be normalized. But I love that it's like talking about things that just I haven't seen a whole lot of other people talk about yet. So you're really opening a lot of great conversations, which I love. The last thing that I really wanted to chat with you about that I've also admired about you is just how you and Brett really handled business while you were raising your children. And I know your kids now are a little bit older. They're both married. Obviously, your son, Brock, either works for you or with you to whatever capacity, and you've got to be so proud of both your kiddos. But you have talked about your priorities especially when they were growing up, and how many opportunities you used to have. I mean, I think I told you the first time that I interviewed you, like I found you originally through Turbo Kick years
Oh,
ago, and I watched you on infomercials when
ah,
I'm pretty sure it was Ava was a baby and she's 16 in the middle of the night. I'd be up nursing a baby and there's Chalene on TV. And so, but I know you had, some really good boundaries growing up about showing your kids on social media and what you would say yes to and what you would say no to. And so could you talk about that just a little bit? Because we have a lot of my audience who are moms. A lot of them are trying to do the business and doing the momming at the same time. They're feeling guilty when they're working on business and not pay attention to their kids. They're feeling guilty when they're paying attention to their kids and their business is suffering. And sometimes I think there's, it's just hard to reconcile those. But I know you had some really good boundaries. And I know that you've said you have never regretted having those boundaries when the kids were younger. So talk about that just a little bit, if you would.
I would just say it's just so critical that you put what those boundaries are in writing, because the mistake I see so many parents making is that they're like, kids and family first, family first. And you say that and you mean that.
Yeah.
And then this incredible opportunity comes your way and you're like, oh, well, so we are just going to do this. And then, but family is first, right? And then it's just like, you don't know how to evaluate these things and you feel like they're never going to come again. And you feel like I need to, I want to provide for my family and there's a way that we're going to be able to do this. And so you start saying yes to things because you haven't thought that scenario through in advance. And so we really did. And we would encourage the people that we worked with to sit down and think of every possible scenario, like best case, worst case, amazing opportunities that could come your way. How do you handle that? What are your boundaries? What are your rules? And we established them for ourselves. And it was so weird. It's like so much easier to make all decisions when you have it in writing. You're not like struggling like with, oh gosh, is this the right thing to do?
Yeah.
I don't know. Should we be saying yes or should we be saying no? Should we do this? And you just don't feel that way once it's in writing. You're like, well, it's a no. And we remember why. And so I think that's really important to have that in writing. And then to remember that you cannot, in my opinion, outsource being a parent. And you have to, and I know that's defined differently for each person, but for me, it was being present. But what I could outsource were mom things that I didn't, my personal opinion. Now I know others can disagree. Like for me, I didn't feel like it made me a better mom if I cooked the meal.
Right.
Brett did the cooking. It didn't make me feel like I was a better mom if I did the laundry.
Right.
It made me feel like a good mom that my kids had clean laundry.
Yeah.
And that
100% agree.
I didn't have to spend time like doing like running to the mall or like baking the cupcakes. And these are very, very mom related things that make you feel like, oh, I'm a good mom. But it's like, I made sure they were done.
Yeah.
And so that I could be there, I could be present. So there was a trade-off, right? Like, cause I couldn't do all those things and work in my business, but so if I had to create that balance. And I also, Brett and I both had to decide what was more important for us to kill it at. Do we want to kill it as parents or do we want to kill it in business? And I've heard many people say, I want to do both. And we didn't. We wanted to kill it as parents and make some money. We didn't need to kill it in business. We did not. I think that's too much pressure. And so in order to not feel that pressure, I would distance myself from people who are always talking about their successes and always talking about the next thing they're doing and the networkers and the blah, 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 and the climbers. And so that I didn't feel tempted.
Yeah.
And we just really maintained that all the way through them leaving the house.
It's so, I love that you brought that up because I have been in masterminds for the last 10 years and I was in 2 of them. I've dropped out of both of them in January because all of a sudden I just felt like we're shifting into this different season. First of all, my husband had some medical things that need paid attention to from a broken hip. And then, we've got an adopted daughter with, she has different needs and she's young, she's only 9. And then we've got, all the way up to 22. We've got one in high school. We've had so many kids, Chalene, but I just felt like, the older our kids have gotten, the more sometimes present they even need for us to be. I mean, when they were young, it was like wiping bottoms, but now it's like helping them with job applications and walking them through relationship challenges. And so anyway, we just felt like for this season, I needed to step back. On one hand, I feel like really uncovered not being in a mastermind because I always have been.
What do you mean?
I don't
uncovered.
know. Like,
what does that mean?
I loved having, none of the people in my real world, like here in Kansas City, are entrepreneurs. So all my best friends are nurses and, they work traditional 9 to 5s. And so it's not like I can get with them for coffee and be like, hey, okay, so have you heard of that new thing that Instagram may be doing, where they're going to start charging you, it's not like that's a conversation. So it was like a really safe group of people that I was able to get face to face with several times a year. And I liked that. But also I found that like, some of the masterminds, man, they want you to travel so much that it's 5, 6, 7 trips a year. And I'm like, I can't do that in this stage of life. And also I woke up one day and I was thinking, okay, I love travel so much. I really don't want to travel that much for work anymore. If I'm going to travel, I
No.
just want to travel for fun.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's where we landed. And so it's been
Yeah.
interesting. But I just appreciated that about you and all of your boundaries. And if you've got 2 more minutes, I want to
Of
end with
course.
just like a rapid fire. Can we? Because I want
Okay.
to be
Sure.
real
Absolutely.
cognizant of your time. Okay, so what's the weirdest thing you own?
Weirdest thing that I own.
Yes, I know it's a weird question, isn't it? It's a list of fun
No.
questions that a what?
I don't know the weirdest thing that I don't know.
You don't
I don't
know.
know. Uh-uh.
Okay, you think on that one. What was
Okay.
your last big splurge?
Um, I paid for like a bunch of ridiculously expensive facials. I'm gonna get one later today.
Amazing.
They're like laser facials.
Yes, I love it. I absolutely love
Like
it.
I probably should have just done a facelift.
I know. What book is currently on your nightstand?
I'm I don't usually read physical books.
Okay.
So let me just see what I most recently downloaded on Audible. This is fun.
Yes, I love that.
Um, oh, How to Do the Work by Dr. Nicole LaPerla. I have not started reading that one yet.
Okay.
And the one I'm just started reading is The New Menopause by Dr. Mary Claire Haver.
Fabulous. Thank you for talking about menopause as well. Appreciate
Another
that.
great one is Doing Life with Your Adult Children. Whoops.
And you started it.
And the subheading is Keep Your Mouth Shut and the Welcome Mat Out.
Okay, that's so good. That's so good. Okay, two more. What's one thing you can't live without?
Um, Hairspray and makeup. But mainly,
Okay.
if I had to pick, I'd say hairspray.
Okay.
And then my husband.
There you go. Last one. This is going to be an interesting answer. What's one thing you are surprisingly good at? You have some like crazy talents. I've heard you rap. I've watched you do your roller skating. Like you can do the whole 2020 voice thing, but
Yeah.
one thing you're surprisingly good at.
I guess I think people are surprised that I like to rap, and I think that's usually surprises people. And I'm really good at anything artistic, anything like I can paint, I can draw, I can see something. I'm like, oh, I can make that. Like I've got that
I'm
eye.
not
Like,
shocked by
oh,
that.
get me into Michael's.
I love it. I love it. Chalene, thank you. I know you're a busy, busy woman. I know you guys are
Oh, this has
traveling
been a pleasure. I love
full
chatting with
time right
you.
now. But when I was listening to your Patreon, I'm like, I need to have her back on and just
Aw,
chat with her for a little bit. So how can people find you online? I feel like Instagram is the place you always want to play. So they can go find
sure.
you on Instagram. If they're
Well,
interested in your Patreon, how do they go find that?
so it's patreon.com/the Chalene Show. And I think currently they have Patreon has, this isn't our special, so I don't know when it ends, but they have you can try it for free for 7 days. So
Awesome.
it's patreon.com/the Chalene Show. And I would just suggest if people are podcast listeners to check out the podcast.
Yeah,
It's the Chalene Show.
which is fabulous. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.